In Episode 17, Identify Compliance Obligations Early and Map Controls, we focus on bringing obligations to the surface at the very start of an initiative, so you do not stumble into costly rework or uncomfortable gaps later. Security programs often discover compliance requirements halfway through a project, leaving teams scrambling to retrofit controls or update architectures under pressure. The promise here is a smoother path, clarity early, mapping that makes sense, and a rhythm where compliance guides design rather than obstructing it. When obligations are known, explicit, and tied to verifiable controls, teams can move faster with less risk and far fewer surprises during audits or assessments. The first step is to inventory regulations, contracts, standards, and internal policies that shape the scope of what you are building or modifying. Regulations may include privacy laws, industry-specific mandates, sectoral security rules, or cross-border data transfer requirements. Contracts with customers or partners often contain security clauses, service-level commitments, audit rights, and data handling obligations. External standards, such as those from the ISO family or payment security frameworks, add another layer of expectations. Internal policies also matter because they reflect organizational values, risk appetite, and historical commitments. Gathering all of these sources into one inventory creates a curated foundation for what must be considered. Understanding applicability requires examining data types, jurisdictions, and processing activities to determine which obligations truly apply. Not every regulation is triggered by mere participation in a market. Some depend on the nature of personal data handled, on whether payment card data is processed, or on how sensitive records are stored or transmitted. Jurisdictional rules may apply to data subjects in specific regions, systems hosted in certain countries, or services accessible across borders. Processing activities, such as analytics, profiling, sharing with third parties, or long-term retention, also influence applicability. By analyzing these elements carefully, teams avoid overscoping or underscoping the compliance footprint. To promote clarity and reduce subjective interpretation later, it helps to record authoritative sources, interpretations, and counsel contacts in a structured way. Authoritative sources may include specific articles of regulations, sections of contracts, or clauses in standards. Interpretations should document how your organization understands ambiguous requirements, with references to guidance notes or established precedents. Counsel contacts, whether internal legal advisors or external experts, provide the escalation paths for complex or disputed questions. Capturing this information visibly keeps everyone aligned and strengthens credibility during audits because you can show how conclusions were reached. Once obligations are clear, the next move is to translate them into control requirements with measurable verification steps. An obligation that says protect personal data is too vague to act on, but one that translates into encryption expectations, access control rules, retention limits, and audit logging requirements becomes actionable. Verification steps describe how you will prove compliance, whether through configuration items, log reviews, test results, or documented approvals. Mapping obligations to controls this way creates a direct line of sight from legal or contractual language to the technical and procedural safeguards teams must implement. It also makes assessments smoother because auditors can trace each requirement to concrete evidence. Prioritization is necessary because not all obligations carry the same enforcement risk, penalties, stakeholder expectations, or business impact. Some obligations, if neglected, could lead to regulatory fines, contract termination, or serious reputational damage, while others represent best practices that carry lower external risk. Stakeholders, such as regulators, customers, internal leadership, or platform teams may place different weight on certain obligations. Business impact considerations include the cost of noncompliance, the difficulty of retrofitting controls, and the effect on user experience or delivery timelines. Prioritizing obligations in this structured way helps you allocate resources where they matter most. To make compliance real from the start, you embed obligations into epics, stories, and acceptance tests during inception rather than bolting them on at the end. Obligations tied to identity, logging, data handling, or retention expectations become part of the backlog structure so teams can plan, sequence, and test them as first-class work. Acceptance tests might confirm that logs include required fields, that data flows remain within approved jurisdictions, or that consent flows behave as required. When obligations are woven into planning artifacts, teams gain shared understanding and avoid mid-project surprises that derail delivery. Evidence pipelines then support not only compliance, but also efficiency by defining where logs, attestations, approvals, and artifacts will live. These pipelines identify which systems generate the evidence, how it will be collected, who will review it, and how long it will be retained. Logs might need to be stored in tamper evidence systems for defined periods. Approvals might need version-controlled records, and attestations might require periodic renewal by system owners. Evidence pipelines prevent late-stage panics where teams scramble to find missing documents or prove compliance after the fact. They also provide clarity during audits, which expect consistent evidence aligned with control requirements. Compliance programs must anticipate exceptions, compensating controls, and waivers because real environments are rarely perfect. Exceptions document where a system or team cannot meet a requirement fully, explaining why and how long the exception will remain in place. Compensating controls describe alternative safeguards that reduce risk enough to allow temporary deviation. Waivers, which typically require leadership or council approval, acknowledge known gaps while setting expiration dates for review. Tracking these items transparently prevents shadow exceptions and clarifies which risks have been deliberately accepted. It also supports exam scenarios that probe how you handle non-compliant conditions while maintaining governance. Audit readiness improves dramatically when you coordinate calendars, owners, and rehearsal walkthroughs rather than treating audits as unpredictable disruptions. Calendars align evidence, refresh cycles, policy reviews, and system updates with known audit windows. Owners for each control, document, or artifact know what is expected of them and by when. Rehearsal walkthroughs simulate audit interactions, checking whether evidence is complete, accessible, and coherent. These rehearsals reveal missing records, outdated documents, or unclear responsibilities early when there is still time to correct them. A rhythm of coordinated readiness reduces stress and demonstrates to auditors that compliance is stable rather than reactive. Monitoring changes in laws, guidance, and rulings ensures your understanding stays current as interpretations evolve. Regulatory bodies issue clarifications, courts set precedents, and industry groups publish recommendations that can shift what compliance requires. A lightweight monitoring function supported by legal, risk, or compliance teams tracks these developments and updates the obligations register when interpretations change. This discipline ensures that your strategy remains aligned with the external environment instead of drifting into outdated assumptions. The compliance picture also extends to suppliers and subprocessors, whose controls and attestations affect your risk and regulatory exposure. Reviewing their certifications, control mappings, audit reports, or contractual commitments provides insight into their maturity. You may need to ensure they meet specific safeguards, support evidence requests, or permit necessary assessments. Tracking their renewal cycles, exceptions, and changes in scope helps prevent blind spots introduced by third-party dependencies. In exam scenarios and real operations, overlooking suppliers is one of the most common sources of compliance surprises. A brief mini-review consolidates the essentials: identify obligations, analyze applicability, map them to control requirements, and design evidence pipelines. You recognize how exceptions, compensating controls, and waivers must be tracked transparently, and how audit readiness depends on disciplined calendars and rehearsals. You understand the need to monitor changes in law and guidance, and to assess suppliers for aligned controls and trustworthy attestations. Together, these practices turn compliance from a reactive burden into a structured, predictable part of development and operations. The conclusion for Episode 17 is to bring all this into a simple but foundational artifact. Create an obligations register that lists sources, applicability notes, mapped controls, evidence expectations, and review dates. That register becomes the authoritative lens through which teams and auditors see your compliance posture. The next action is to map your top 5 obligations into that register, so you can begin turning abstract requirements into concrete, testable controls. Each iteration strengthens your preparation for both the exam and the realities of delivering secure, compliant systems. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.